What's the worst thing that's happened to one of your friends? A few winters back my friend was driving and merged uphill onto an interstate overpass. He hit a patch of black ice on the ramp and went into a skid. His truck ending up slamming parallel into the guardrail and he wasn't wearing his seatbelt. He's a big dude, college football player at the time, and the force of the impact sent him clean through the driver door and off the overpass. He fell 40 feet and landed on the highway below that he'd just left. Amazingly, no spinal or cerebral damage, but basically the whole left side of his body was shattered. Pelvis, elbow, 5 ribs were all broken, huge hole in his diaphragm, torn urethra. He was in a bad way. 3 weeks of medically induced coma and 8 procedures later he pulled through. 8 months after that the madman made it back on the football field for his senior year of college. Practically a cyborg at that point with all of the hardware in his body. Doctors are pretty sure he only lived because he was in such good shape at the time of the accident. He always wears his seatbelt now, as should you. I was on a Skype call in 2014 with a friend I had met when I was at school in Japan. She casually brought up that she hadn't heard from her dad in a couple of weeks after he went on a work trip to the Middle East. He was a journalist and this was when ISIS was at its height. A few months later a video of him being held hostage by ISIS was released on Facebook. After the Japanese government failed to coordinate an effect exchange agreement with the Turkish government in time, a video of him being beheaded was released. My friend later told me that she forced herself to watch the video. He died of a seizure in the middle of the night. The worst part was he was going to see a neurologist the next day about his sudden onset of seizures. R.I.P. Tommy. I lost a friend this way. She was 23 and from a really small town in Iowa. Her family had adopted her from Korea when she was a baby. She moved to Des Moines to get away from her small town, and I met her while she was finishing a phlebotomy program. We were really close, or at least I thought we were. There was a group of us that would go out several times a week and we were heavy drinkers. She never told any of us that she had epilepsy. I know why she hid it, because she just wanted to be able to go out and participate with the rest of us. But it was incredibly shocking to have a friend just not wake up one morning. A friend of mine was murdered, shot 14 times. He was left for dead on somewhat remote road. He was 15. It's hard to deal with friends going out like that. Thanks for your kind response to my comment. Wish there was something more I could say, but I have a hard time finding the right words here. One of my friends was sliding down a railing that was next to a ground storm drain made of concrete. He slipped backwards and cracked his skull open. It was near midnight and we were pretty close to a hospital, so I just kinda picked him up and ran. I hope I never see the inside of someone's head up close again. I had a friend who I went through elementary school and middle schools with. He moved away in the middle of 7th grade and our friend group was heartbroken, but figured we'd see him again. Last week, he was shot in the head by his friend, who was showing him a gun and pointed it at him as a joke. He was 18. A friend in high school was hit by a car and dragged a couple of 100 yards before he died. The driver was drunk and on coke. It was 8 AM when it happened. My friend was on his way to school. Went to school, GR 5-12, with a guy that something similar to this happened to him. He was working at a bar, went to break up a fight outside, and some girl in her early 20s hit him with her car and dragged him several blocks. He lives in a long-term care facility now, can pretty much only blink. Total care. I found this out because I started working there as a nurse. He and his brother were away at college. His father fell asleep with a cigar in hand, and the house began to burn. So far as could be determined, the father woke, went to get his wife, carried her downstairs, and made it to within a couple feet of the door. They both died, and the house was destroyed. Tried to swim to shore from a sailboat in Lake Michigan. She was a strong swimmer, but even in the summer hypothermia is a threat. They didn't find her body for several weeks, and during that time famous fake psychic Sylvia King Brown told the family she was alive and being held on a boat against her will. Still miss you, Julie. You ever hate someone so much that you actually consider pissing on their grave? My mom's stepdad used to babysit us when I was very little, and while he never touched us, he did expose us to a lot. I knew what a dick looked like when I was 4. He showed me porn, and I genuinely thought he peed himself one day when he sent my sister to grab him a tissue. But what's worse is what he did to my grandma. When she was still living with him, he'd asked her to screw his friend while he watched, and she wouldn't do it. After a few strokes and a couple heart attacks, she was physically disabled and couldn't walk, so she was put in a nursing home. That sack of shit brought his friend to visit her in the nursing home one day and had him rape her while he watched. He died recently. I was so happy. This isn't exactly relevant, but this is the first time I've typed this all out. What's worse, mom's biological dad was an even worse person. Me and my 3 other friends were longboarding down this highway and suddenly one of my friend crashed into a tree head first. For some reason his helmet went off before impact. We managed to get him to a hospital as fast as possible. He suffered itch, went into a coma, and died 2 hours later. This happened 4 years ago, May 28th. He was kidnapped, never to be seen again. I miss him. Edit. We worked together, and the owners had businesses with drug dealers. Actually, one of the owners was killed years prior. I quit in September 2015, and I begged him to quit. It wasn't worth it. He replied, "Dude, there are no jobs. I cannot simply quit." In November, him and another former co-worker, with whom I wasn't too close with, went to see a terrain for the owners. Nobody knew what happened, probably the owners, but they didn't really cared. Some hinted he isn't necessarily dead, but the options are he became a hitman against his own will, or he became a slave. Not really better tbh. A girl from my high school killed herself 2 days before graduation day. She was in the same class as my brother-in-law, which is how I know the details. The senior prank was camping out on the football field, which had a parking lot on a hill, where anyone could watch everything happening at the school. From this vantage point, cops watched the seniors hang out, drink alcohol, and roam the campus. A building was left unlocked, so some of the kids went inside, but no one stole or damaged anything. When the seniors all went back to their tents for the night, the cops came and arrested them for breaking and entering, trespassing, minor in possession, etc. Most of the kids were the good kids who were going to college. Many planned to be pre-med. This girl was told, while still drunk, that she would have all her scholarships taken away. She wouldn't be allowed to walk at graduation. Her admission to undergrad would be revoked, and that she would never get into med school. Essentially, she was told that her life was over. She ended up hanging herself, and her mom found her the next morning. I saw where her older sister was looking through Facebook messages a few months later, and found a message from that morning, where her sister had made a new account after her parents took her phone away. The older sister didn't see the message, because she wasn't friends with the new profile on Facebook. One of my best friends in high school was murdered when he opened the back door of the Little Caesars we worked for when someone knocked. It was after closing on a Sunday, and he probably expected it to be one of our friends coming by to toke up. He was one of the coolest, most chill guys you'd ever meet, and he took a shotgun to the face that night. Worse still, cocksuckers who did it got off on a technicality. She was cycling through London and a bus hit her so hard she came off, landed on her head, and died. She was also quite literally the last member of her family. Both her parents were only children, and had both died of cancer, and she had no siblings. Her death was the end of her family tree. She was 23. People who break into cars are generally not the kind of people with well-documented traceable identities. They're at the bottom, and the good ones can get it done without leaving a meaningful trace, anyway. So they don't have much to lose, and can get away with anything. So if you're like my friend, and you see someone breaking into your car at 1 AM behind a strip mall with no cameras, you shouldn't get involved. But if you were my friend that night, you decide to confront the bastard, and you get stabbed to death. And there are no leads. My friend's new GF was at work, and the girl's soon-to-be ex-husband showed up to meet him. My friend and the GF worked together, and when they went out to the parking lot, he pulled a gun out and shot my friend dead, then killed himself. Look up St. Clair Hospital shooting. Just happened a month ago. Love you, bro. Gang raped by multiple players and coaches of my university's basketball team who had a trafficking ring. Her life was threatened to ensure she didn't tell anyone, and she was stalked. Police botched the investigation, and the university covered it up. All of her rapists transferred schools. It boils my blood knowing they all walked free and are potentially abusing other women. A good friend of mine was shot in the head by an ex-boyfriend. She lived for a few days until her parents took her off life support. The ex holed up in his apartment and went into a standoff until he killed himself. I love you, Elena. I had a friend I used to walk home from school with most days, but after we left school we kind of lost touch a bit. I'd see him around now and again and we'd have a chat, but that was it. Then a couple of years later the Daily Mail phoned me, wanting to interview me about him. He was captured in North Afghanistan fighting for the Taliban. I looked into it and found out as much as I could. He'd been traveling alone in Europe and, from what I can gather, got mugged somewhere. Lost, broken, scared in a foreign country. Someone reached out to help him. Turns out that person was some kind of recruiter. I have no idea what kind of brainwashing went on, but when he returned to the UK he moved into the Finsbury Park Mosque, which, at the time, was well known for radicalization. Eventually he ended up in North Afghanistan. According to the US soldiers, who nicknamed him the SAS guy because of all his weaponry, he even met Bin Laden a few times. Despite his claims to just being the it guy, he ended up in Guantanamo Bay. I've read transcripts of what he said at government hearings into his role. That doesn't sound anything like the guy I used to walk home from school with. I'm in no way condoning his role in what happened over there, but it's so sad that the person he was is gone, just completely destroyed and used up by other people like that. It's hard to say what's the worst. I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma and many of my childhood friends have died well before their time. One of them was murdered execution style after a bad business deal surrounding a music video. Another forgot to put the parking brake on while making a quick repair on a derrick, and it rolled back on him and crushed his head. Another disappeared after a tour in Iraq, just called his wife to say he couldn't come home because he had murdered children. A lot of the ones that are still alive are in prison or in and out of rehab. I've gone through a few things that seemed awful, but I've been very lucky to avoid the worst of it, I think. Sexually assaulted, has to see her abuser regularly because of a broken system. Edit. For those asking about details, she was shut down mentally and wanted so bad for the guy to be a good guy. She didn't tell anyone and didn't report for a few months. Corona also made it impossible. She couldn't have gotten a rape kit done in a reasonable amount of time either, because of where it happened. All that's left as proof is text messages and word of mouth. He has a history of being a creep with girls and trying to get them alone. Not sure if he's actually harmed anyone else. Nothing substantial enough to throw the piece of human garbage in jail. We all go to college together, and so we're stuck. He has walked away with zero repercussions. One of my friends was murdered by her ex-boyfriend. Several months before it happened, they got drunk and high, and he absolutely destroyed her house, and then tortured her. He stabbed her, put hot sauce in her eyes, beat her with a belt, and raped her. She broke it off with him after that. We don't know for sure what happened, but he got into her house, and he killed her. I'd never been so numb in my entire life when my wife told me what had happened, and I started thinking about her children. She had lost custody of them, and now their mom was gone. I think about her all the time. I drive by her old house whenever I'm in the neighborhood, and I still can't believe that happened to my friend. A good friend of mine has a sister that lived in the southern US. We are in New York. One day she gets a call that the sister had a bad accident, was in a coma, and probably wouldn't make it. She, along with other family members, go down to see her. Well, she wakes up. At that point her husband told the family they had to leave. The family figured all along that the husband did it, history of abuse, and they figured that the sister would tell what happened and that's why husband made them leave. Eventually sister tells them to leave because she's controlled by her husband. Fast forward to now, and sister is here in New York, having left the husband with her young daughter. She did finally admit that he did it, but I don't know the details and I don't know if he's been charged with a crime. But she's left with a wobbly gait and no real speech. She has a very low mumble. What's interesting is that the daughter is speaking 3 languages, English, Spanish, her family's native language, and mumble. She imitates her mother's speech. It's kinda sweet actually. And most importantly, she and her mom are safe. Let him crash at ours when he was between places. While I was out, he got drunk and tried to bully my wife into having sex with him. He told her, "If you don't, I will tell him you did, and he will believe me." She suggested he go get some beers first and then lock the doors, hid out at a neighbor's, and called me and the cops. Cops got there before I did and couldn't actually arrest him for anything, but basically said he should fuck off to somewhere else or we will find a reason to take you to jail. Good thing too, because if I got there first, I would probably gotten arrested for kicking his ass. My friend committed suicide at his 15s or 16s a few years ago. We were best friends in childhood. Well, he was for me definitely. But our parents decided we should change the school we studied in, so at the end of our first school year we studied in different places. When I was told that he jumped off the window of his flat, I couldn't believe it. He was so funny and carefree, you know. It's still hard for me to think about him. I noticed that few times in a year I open my photo album where there are pics of him and me playing together. After we changed schools, we stopped talking and communicating. He got a new life and friends like me too. However, I tried to find his ACC on social media, but it was futile though. Sometimes I blame myself that I tried not that hard to find him. I'm the kind of person who will try to help you and to solve all problems of yours. But I couldn't solve at least one of his. My friend died of a year-long fight with an invasive brain tumor. Found love though. She almost didn't get his insurance because of a false positive on a drug test. No shit, he passed hot for morphine. The doctor gave it to him because he has cancer. But after a long fight with them, it went through. Lost another friend when he was home on leave after the war. Died in his driveway. On his way out, a semi ran off the road and into him with no brakes. Insurance almost didn't pay out on him because his seatbelt wasn't buckled. That can happen if you just got in the car. They awarded it though, not because it was the right thing to do, but because his family's lawyer cited the car was still in park, and even though the keys were in the ignition, the car had not been started. One I didn't fight for, and I damn well should have. And that one eats me up the most. Back in elementary, one kid who I was friends with was riding his bike without shoes. He was riding really fast and then hit brakes and put his feet down instinctively to slow himself down, and in the process, he skinned the bottoms of both of his feet. They were pouring blood like a shower head pours out water. That shit was scary. He got off the bike, took 2 steps, then literally fainted. I'm guessing it was from seeing all of his blood on the pavement. I called 4 teachers to come over to help him, and he was rushed immediately to the ER. He had to be excused from classes for the next 4 months because he needed a skin graft for his feet. His skin had been shredded completely off of the bottom of both of his feet, and when he came back for the last couple weeks of school, he was in a wheelchair because of the pain from the graft. But the thing is, I was the only person besides him who saw him scrape his feet, and it was the worst thing in my life. When I was 13, my best friend's dad died of a sudden heart attack at the age of 44. I've lost people, family even, in my life, and I can honestly say nothing hurt as much as him losing his dad. I remember the funeral and the wake so vividly. I remember at the wake he was just standing there next to the casket holding his dad's hand for hours. I went and stood next to him and just put my hand on his shoulder the whole time. We are still best friends to this day, some 13 years later. But I know it was the worst thing to happen to him. And I think it's one of the worst things I've had to go through as well. A friend of mine always wanted to be a mother since she was old enough to grasp the concept. Couldn't find a good man until she was 29 with her then husband. Then they had a huge divorce because he impregnated another chick while cheating on her. She got pregnant from the first man she slept with after a year, was incredibly happy and absolutely ready to be a great mother. Informed her parents. They supported her, painted the child room, and arranged it after 3 months. Bought loads and loads of toys and plush. Then the baby gets born. It's a healthy, beautiful boy. She radiates so much happiness, like I've never seen before. They celebrate his 1st, 2nd, 3rd and 4th birthday. Then he gets sick. Can barely talk, has pain when walking. They go to a hospital regularly. They can't tell what's wrong. He can't eat on his own anymore. Can't lift his arms. Forgets how to speak. Finally the doctors say it's a rare sickness in which he's constantly losing muscle mass. Within some months he's on life support, can't breathe on his own. The doctors say they have no treatment, except making his life less painful through medication. He died 2 years later. She killed herself after his funeral. Grew up in a very religious household, evangelical Christian. Was the youngest of 4 girls. All of her sisters married young and started having babies non-stop due to the nature of their religion. However, she was usually forced to babysit for her sisters, who often would live at home with their parents for long stretches of time due to financial trouble. She loved dogs and finally got a dog that she loved to death. However, her oldest sister's husband was very cruel to her. He saw her as a servant and sexually harassed her. One day, they got into a huge argument, so he went and got her dog to bite him due to bothering her. He claimed the dog attacked him outright and that he was afraid the dog would bite one of the kids, so her parents got rid of the dog. My friend was absolutely devastated. It wasn't long after that she started doing mission work in other countries. I think it was an excuse to get away from her home. She's doing better now, has a boyfriend and still does mission work. On August 10th, 2018, a Horizon Air Bombardier Dash 8Q400 was stolen from Seattle Tacoma International Airport, SeaTac, in SeaTac, Washington. The perpetrator, 29-year-old Richard Russell, was a Horizon Air ground service agent with no piloting experience. He performed an unauthorized takeoff and 2 McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle fighters were subsequently scrambled to intercept the aircraft. SeaTac Air Traffic Control made radio contact with Russell, the sole occupant, who described himself as a broken guy. Got a few screws loose, I guess. Approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes after takeoff, Russell committed suicide by intentionally crashing the aircraft on the lightly populated Ketron Island in Puget Sound.